Apache chief traded his warhorse for a servant widow, but she showed him that honor can't be bought, in a tale that would reshape everything both of them believed about power, loyalty, and what it truly means to be free. Silver Creek Territory, New Mexico, 1874, where the desert wind carried the scent of sage and the promise of violence, where white settlements pressed against Apache hunting grounds like a blade against a throat, and where honor was measured in blood spilled and enemies conquered. The trading post at Broken Mesa squatted against the red rock cliffs like a festering wound. Built from stolen timber and broken dreams, its walls scarred by bullet holes, and its reputation stained with the kind of business decent folks pretended not to know about. Yet Red Thunder, war chief of the Mountain Wolf Band, rode toward it with the morning sun, painting shadows across his weathered face. He sat astride Lightning Strike, a magnificent black stallion whose hooves had carried him through 17 raids, and whose speed had saved his life more times than he could count. The horse was more than transportation, more than a weapon of war. Lightning Strike was his spirit companion, the physical manifestation of his power as a leader. And today, Red Thunder was going to trade him for something the white men considered worthless. The trading post's owner, Jeremiah Cutlass, emerged from the shadows of his porch like a vulture sensing carrion. His greasy hair hung in strings around a face that spoke of too much whiskey and too little conscience. Gold teeth glinted when he smiled, which was never a good sign for anyone doing business with him. "Well, well, if it ain't the Apache Prince himself," Cutlass called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake oil salesman. "What brings the mighty Red Thunder to my humble establishment? Got something to trade or just looking to start trouble?" Red Thunder dismounted with fluid grace, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. He wore traditional Apache clothing, leather leggings, a cotton shirt, and a red headband that marked his status as a war leader. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark as winter nights and twice as unforgiving. "I come to trade," Red Thunder said in careful English, his accent thick but his meaning clear. He had learned the white man's tongue, not from friendship, but from necessity. Knowing your enemy's words could mean the difference between life and death. Cutlass's eyes immediately went to Lightning Strike, and Red Thunder saw the greed flare like a struck match. The horse was worth more than most men made in 5 years, its bloodline traced back to Spanish stock, its training the product of Apache horsemanship that white men could never replicate. "That's some horse you got there, Chief," Cutlass said, circling Lightning Strike like a buyer examining livestock. "What you looking to get for him?" "Got some new rifles came in last week, or maybe you're interested in ammunition." "I want the woman," Red Thunder said simply. Cutlass stopped circling, his expression shifting from greed to confusion. "What woman?" "I got several working girls, if you're looking for company, though I'd think a war chief could afford better than what I got here." "The servant woman. The widow," Red Thunder clarified. "The one who works for no pay." A cruel smile spread across Cutlass's face as understanding dawned. "Oh, you mean Hannah, the Irish woman. She ain't for sale, Chief. She's working off her late husband's debts. Probably got another 3 years of servitude left before she's free." Hannah Patterson emerged from the trading post's interior at that moment, carrying a heavy bucket of dirty water that she struggled to manage with her thin frame. She was perhaps 25 years old, with auburn hair pulled back severely and green eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Her dress was patched and faded, her hands raw from endless scrubbing and cleaning. Red Thunder watched her pour the water into the dirt, noting how she moved with careful dignity despite her circumstances, how she kept her head up even when Cutlass spoke of her like property. There was strength in her bearing that reminded him of his own people's women, who faced hardship without surrendering their spirit. "She lost her husband to Apache raiders last spring," Cutlass continued with obvious relish. "Tom Patterson owed me considerable money when he died, so now his widow works it off. Washing clothes, cooking, cleaning, doing whatever needs doing. Of course, if you're interested in her for other purposes, we could arrange something temporary." Red Thunder's jaw tightened at the implication, but his voice remained steady. "I want to buy her freedom, not rent her services." Hannah had frozen at the sound of their conversation, her knuckles white as she gripped the empty bucket. She stared at Red Thunder with a mixture of fear and confusion, clearly wondering why an Apache war chief would have any interest in purchasing her freedom. Her freedom, Cutlass repeated slowly, as if the concept was foreign to him. "Well now, that's an expensive proposition, Chief. She owes me near $400 in debt, plus interest, plus room and board, for the time she's been here. I'd say her freedom's worth about $600. Red Thunder knew the man was inflating the price, but he also knew that Hannah Patterson's life was worth more than money. He had seen her before, during previous visits to the trading post, had watched how she endured Cutlass's casual cruelty and the rough treatment of his customers, had noticed the quiet dignity with which she bore her burdens. "I do not have $600, Red Thunder said, his hand moving to rest on Lightning Strike's neck. "But I have this horse." Cutlass's eyes widened, then narrowed with calculation. Lightning Strike was worth far more than $600, possibly more than $1,000 to the right buyer. But he was also looking at an Apache war chief who might change his mind and simply take what he wanted by force. "That horse is worth more than the woman's debt," Cutlass said carefully. "Yes," Red Thunder agreed. "But you will take this trade, or you will take nothing." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Cutlass looked around nervously, noting that several of his regular customers had emerged from the trading post to watch the proceedings. Among them were 3 buffalo hunters, 2 drifters, and a cavalry deserter, all of them armed, and all of them curious about what would happen next. Hannah stepped forward suddenly, her voice clear despite the tremor in it. "I don't understand what's happening here, but I won't be traded like livestock. I may be in debt, but I'm still a human being with rights." Red Thunder turned to look at her directly for the first time, and something passed between them. A recognition of shared strength, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of one warrior by another. "You are being traded for your freedom," Red Thunder said in careful English. "Not for servitude." "Why?" Hannah asked, her green eyes searching his face. "Why would you trade such a valuable horse for the freedom of a stranger?" Red Thunder considered his answer carefully. How could he explain the vision that had come to him 3 nights ago? The dream, where the spirits of his ancestors had shown him a path that seemed to make no sense. How could he describe the feeling that had settled in his chest when he watched her endure humiliation without breaking? How could he make her understand that sometimes honor demanded actions that appeared foolish to others? "Because," he said finally, "no person should be owned by another." Cutlass snorted. "That's rich coming from an Apache. Your people have been taking captives for generations." Red Thunder's hand moved to the knife at his belt, and the trading post fell silent. "We take captives in war. We do not buy and sell human beings like cattle. There is a difference." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something that could easily turn violent. Cutlass was calculating whether the profit from Lightning Strike was worth the risk of insulting a war chief. While his customers were deciding whether to intervene or simply watch the show, Hannah stepped between them, her voice steady despite the danger. "Mr. Cutlass, if this man is willing to pay my debt with his horse, then I accept the trade. You'll have your payment, and I'll have my freedom. Everyone gets what they want." Cutlass looked from Hannah to Red Thunder to Lightning Strike, his greed warring with his caution. Finally greed won, as it usually did with men like him. "Fine," he said, spitting in the dirt. "A horse for the woman's freedom. But I want it understood that once she leaves here, she's not my problem anymore. Whatever happens to her after that is between you and her." Red Thunder nodded once, then began removing Lightning Strike's saddle and bridle. Each piece of gear was crafted by Apache hands and worth a small fortune on its own. But he set them aside without hesitation. The horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding the significance of what was happening. "The papers," Red Thunder said to Cutlass. "What papers?" "The debt papers. The documents that bind her to you. Bring them and burn them. I want to see her freedom with my own eyes." Cutlass disappeared into the trading post and returned with a ledger and several sheets of paper covered in his spidery handwriting. He tossed them into a fire barrel and lit them with a match. The papers curled and blackened as the flames consumed Hannah's bondage. Hannah watched the papers burn with tears streaming down her face. But they were tears of relief, not sorrow. For the first time in 8 months, she was truly free. No longer bound by her dead husband's debts or Cutlass's casual tyranny. Red Thunder handed Lightning Strike's lead rope to Cutlass, then turned to Hannah. "You are free to go where you choose. Where can I go?" Hannah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have no money, no family, nowhere to turn. My husband's debts consumed everything we owned. You can come with me," Red Thunder said, the words surprising him as much as they surprised everyone else present. "Come with you where?" "To my village. To my people. You can live among the mountain wolf band as a free woman. No one will own you. No one will force you to work without payment. You will be under my protection." Hannah stared at him in amazement. "You would do that? You would bring a white woman into your village, knowing it could cause problems with your people?" "I would do that," Red Thunder confirmed. "But the choice is yours. You are free now, truly free. And free people make their own decisions." The buffalo hunters had begun murmuring among themselves, clearly disapproving of the idea of an Apache chief offering sanctuary to a white woman. One of them, a bearded giant named Morrison, stepped forward. "Now hold on there, Chief," Morrison said, his hand resting on his gun butt. "That woman's got no business going off with savages. She's a white woman, and she belongs with white folks." Red Thunder's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "She belongs to no one. She is free to choose her own path." "Like hell she is," Morrison growled. "We can't just let you ride off with a white woman. Folks back in town would have our hides if they found out we allowed such a thing." Hannah surprised everyone by stepping closer to Red Thunder, her chin lifted defiantly. "I can speak for myself, Mr. Morrison, and if I choose to go with this man who just bought my freedom, that's my decision to make." "The hell it is," Morrison snarled, drawing his pistol. "You're coming back to town with us, whether you like it or not." The other buffalo hunters drew their weapons as well, and suddenly the trading post had become a powder keg waiting for a spark. Red Thunder remained perfectly still, but Hannah could sense the coiled violence in him. Like a mountain cat preparing to spring. "Put your guns away," Cutlass said nervously. "I don't want any killing on my property." Bad for business? But Morrison was beyond reason now, inflamed by whiskey and the kind of racial hatred that burned like a fever in men of his type. "That redskin's not taking her anywhere. She's coming with us." That's when Red Thunder moved. Faster than thought, faster than fear. He drew his knife and had it at Morrison's throat before the buffalo hunter could blink. The other men hesitated, knowing that any sudden movement would mean their friend's death. "Lower your weapons," Red Thunder said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded warriors in life-and-death situations. "Or this man dies here in the dirt." The standoff stretched like a taut bowstring, everyone frozen in a tableau of violence and possibility. Hannah found herself holding her breath, acutely aware that her newfound freedom might be measured in seconds rather than years. Then she made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. She walked calmly to where Red Thunder's saddle and gear lay in the dust, picked up a cavalry pistol that had been part of the equipment, and pointed it steadily at Morrison's companions. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice remarkably steady for a woman who had never held a gun before this moment, "I believe you should do as the chief suggests. Lower your weapons and step away." The buffalo hunters looked at her in amazement, clearly not expecting the quiet servant woman to show such spine. But there was something in her green eyes that convinced them she meant business. Slowly, reluctantly, they holstered their guns. Red Thunder released Morrison, who stumbled backward, clutching his throat and glaring with undisguised hatred. "This ain't over," Morrison gasped. "You ride off with her, and every white man in the territory will be hunting you. Both of you." Red Thunder sheathed his knife with deliberate slowness. "Let them come. They will find me ready." Hannah handed the pistol back to Red Thunder, surprised to find her hands barely shaking. "Thank you," she said simply. "You do not need to thank me for allowing you to choose your own path," Red Thunder replied. "That is what freedom means." As the tension began to ease, Cutlass nervously approached Red Thunder. "Chief, you might want to get moving. Word of this is going to spread, and Morrison's got friends in town. Might not be safe to linger." Red Thunder nodded, then turned to Hannah. "We should go." "Do you have belongings to gather?" Hannah looked back at the trading post that had been her prison for 8 months. Everything she owned could fit in a small satchel. Just a few things. "I'll be quick." As she hurried inside to gather her meager possessions, Red Thunder checked the sun's position. They had perhaps 6 hours of daylight left, enough to reach the hidden canyon where his band made their winter camp. But the journey would be dangerous, especially with angry white men likely to follow. Hannah emerged with a small leather bag containing her few personal items. Her wedding ring, a Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a faded photograph of her and Tom on their wedding day. Everything else in her life had been lost to debt and circumstance. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice carried the weight of someone leaving everything familiar behind. Red Thunder had retrieved a horse from Cutlass's corral, a sturdy bay mare that would serve Hannah well. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes, Tom taught me when we first came to the territory." As they prepared to mount their horses, Morrison called out one final threat. "You're making a mistake, woman. Those savages will use you up and throw you away. Mark my words, you'll die out there in the desert, and nobody will ever know what happened to you." Hannah turned back to face him, her green eyes blazing with newfound courage. "Mr. Morrison, I've been dying slowly in this place for months. At least now I'll be dying free." With that, she swung into the saddle with surprising grace. Red Thunder mounted his new horse, a chestnut gelding that would never match Lightning Strike's speed or spirit, but would have to suffice. As they rode away from the trading post, Hannah didn't look back. She had spent too many months looking backward, mourning what was lost. Now she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, painted in shades of gold and crimson by the afternoon sun. Behind them, the trading post grew smaller, until it was just another speck in the endless landscape. But Hannah felt no fear. For the first time since Tom's death, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Red Thunder rode beside her in comfortable silence, occasionally scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. He was taking an enormous risk, bringing a white woman to his village. His people had suffered greatly at the hands of white soldiers and settlers. Many would see Hannah as an enemy, regardless of her circumstances. But something in her bearing, in the way she had faced down armed men to claim her freedom, told him she was stronger than she appeared. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Hannah finally spoke. "Chief Red Thunder, may I ask you something?" "Ask. Why did you really trade your horse for me? And please don't say it was just because no one should be owned. There's more to it than that." Red Thunder rode in silence for several minutes, considering his answer. How could he explain the vision that had come to him? The dream where he saw himself standing at a crossroads, with one path leading to endless war, and the other to something he couldn't quite understand. How could he describe the voice of his grandmother, long dead, whispering in his ear that sometimes the greatest victories came not from taking life but from preserving it? "3 nights ago," he said finally, "I had a vision. The spirits showed me a woman with fire in her heart but chains on her hands. They told me that freeing her would teach me something I needed to learn, something about the difference between power and strength." Hannah absorbed this, understanding that she was hearing something sacred. "And what do you think they meant?" "I do not know yet," Red Thunder admitted, "but I believe I will learn as we travel this path together." The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. Somewhere behind them, angry men were likely preparing to give chase. Ahead lay an uncertain future in a world that would see their partnership as impossible, even dangerous. But for now, in this moment, they rode side by side toward the setting sun. Two people who had chosen freedom over safety, uncertainty over bondage, And in that choice, something new was being born. Something that would test everything both of them believed about honor, loyalty, and what it meant to be truly free. The desert twilight painted the sky in shades of blood and copper as Red Thunder and Hannah rode deeper into Apache territory. 3 hours had passed since they left the trading post, and the silence between them had grown comfortable, broken only by the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. But Red Thunder's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon, watching for the dust clouds that would signal pursuit. Hannah had proven herself a capable rider, keeping pace without complaint despite the grueling terrain. Her back remained straight in the saddle, her hands steady on the reins, but Red Thunder could see the exhaustion beginning to take its toll. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her lips were pressed thin with determination. She had not eaten a proper meal in days, perhaps weeks, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation at the trading post was beginning to fade. "We will stop soon," Red Thunder said, noting how she swayed slightly as her horse navigated a particularly rocky section of the trail. "There is a place ahead where we can rest safely." Hannah nodded gratefully, but said nothing, conserving her energy for the ride ahead. She had learned long ago not to waste words on unnecessary conversation, a habit born from months of servitude where speaking out of turn could mean a beating or worse. But something about Red Thunder's presence made her feel safer than she had in months, despite the fact that she was riding into unknown territory with a man who was supposed to be her enemy. The canyon Red Thunder led them to was a hidden gem carved from red sandstone by countless years of wind and water. A narrow entrance, barely wide enough for 2 horses, opened into a sheltered space the size of a small meadow. Ancient petroglyphs decorated the walls, telling stories of hunts and ceremonies that predated the white man's arrival by centuries. A natural spring bubbled up from the rock, creating a small pool surrounded by hardy desert plants. "My people have used this place for generations," Red Thunder explained as they dismounted. "It is sacred ground, protected by the spirits of our ancestors. No harm can come to those who shelter here with pure intentions." Hannah looked around in wonder at the ancient artwork and the peaceful atmosphere of the hidden canyon. "It's beautiful," she said softly, "like a cathedral made of stone." Red Thunder was surprised by her comparison. Most white people he had encountered saw only empty wasteland where his people saw sacred spaces. But Hannah's eyes held reverence as she studied the petroglyphs, her fingers tracing the air just above the ancient symbols without actually touching them. "You understand that these are holy places," he observed, "gathering wood for a fire. My mother taught me that the divine can be found anywhere." "If you know how to look," Hannah replied. She would have loved this place. She always said that God spoke clearest in the quiet spaces, away from the noise and bustle of human ambition. As Red Thunder built their fire, Hannah tended to the horses, removing their saddles and bridles with practiced efficiency. She had learned to care for animals during her marriage to Tom, who had been a decent man despite his poor judgment with money. The familiar routine of caring for the horses brought her a measure of peace, reminding her of happier times when her future had seemed secure. The fire caught quickly in the dry desert air, casting dancing shadows on the canyon walls. Red Thunder produced a small bag of pemmican from his gear, along with some dried corn and a metal pot for brewing tea from desert sage. It was simple fare, but to Hannah it seemed like a feast after months of subsisting on scraps and leftovers at the trading post. "Tell me about your husband," Red Thunder said, as they shared the modest meal. "What manner of man was he?" Hannah was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Tom was a dreamer," she said finally, "always convinced that the next opportunity would be the one to make our fortune. He had a good heart, but no head for business. We came west because he heard about silver strikes in the territory, thought he could make enough money to buy us a proper ranch back in Missouri. But the silver was not there. Oh, there was silver. But Tom trusted the wrong people, made partnerships with men who saw him coming from a mile away. They took advantage of his optimism, his willingness to believe the best of people. By the time he realized what was happening, we owed more money than we could possibly repay. Red Thunder studied her face in the firelight, noting the way her hands trembled slightly as she spoke of her husband's death. How did he die? Hannah's breath caught, and for a moment Red Thunder thought she wouldn't answer. Then the words came out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for months and could no longer contain them. Raiders hit our claim in the early morning. Tom tried to fight them off, but he only had an old rifle and they were better armed. They shot him down like a dog and burned everything we had built. I hid in the mine shaft until they left, then crawled out to find Tom bleeding to death in the dirt. He lived long enough to tell me he was sorry, that he had failed me. Then he was gone. Red Thunder felt something tighten in his chest at her words. He had led many raids against white settlements, had killed many men defending their homes and families. But hearing the pain in Hannah's voice, seeing the grief that still haunted her eyes, forced him to confront the human cost of the war between their peoples. "The raiders," he said carefully. "Were they Apache?" Hannah met his gaze directly, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes, they were Apache. Young warriors, maybe 16 or 17 years old. They painted their faces for war and carried weapons I'd never seen before. Beautiful weapons decorated with feathers and beadwork. The description sent a chill through Red Thunder. Young warriors with decorated weapons meant they were likely from one of the more aggressive bands, possibly the Crimson Wolf Pack that had been raiding white settlements without authorization from the tribal council. Such actions brought swift retaliation from the army, punishing innocent Apache families for the crimes of a few hotheads. "I'm sorry for your loss," Red Thunder said formally. "Those young men brought shame upon all Apache people with their actions. There is no honor in killing unarmed settlers or burning the homes of families." Hannah studied his face, surprised by the genuine regret she heard in his voice. "You really mean that, don't you? You're not just saying what you think I want to hear." "I do not speak false words to comfort others," Red Thunder replied. "Honor demands truth, even when truth brings pain. Those warriors who killed your husband violated the old ways. They brought violence without purpose, death without meaning. Such actions weaken all our people." The fire crackled between them as Hannah absorbed his words. For 8 months, she had nursed her hatred of all Apache people, blaming an entire nation for the actions of a few young raiders. But sitting here with Red Thunder, seeing the genuine sorrow in his dark eyes, she found her anger beginning to crack like ice in spring sunshine. "At the trading post," she said slowly, "when you said no person should be owned by another, did you mean that?" "I meant every word, even though I'm white, even though my husband was killed by your people." Red Thunder poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. "The color of your skin does not change the color of your spirit. And you are not responsible for your husband's choices, just as I am not responsible for the crimes of every Apache warrior. We can only answer for our own actions, our own honor." Hannah felt tears starting to gather in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough tears over the past months to fill the trading post's wash basins. "Why are you being kind to me? It would be easier to hate me, to see me as just another white woman who doesn't belong in your world." "Because," Red Thunder said, meeting her gaze across the dancing flames, "hatred is a poison that destroys the one who carries it more than the one it is aimed at. My grandmother taught me that wisdom before she walked the spirit trail. She said that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy your enemies, but from the wisdom to turn enemies into something else." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Into what? That remains to be seen. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, answered by another from across the canyon. The fire burned low, casting longer shadows on the ancient walls, covered with the artwork of Hannah's ancestors. But for the first time since Tom's death, Hannah felt something approaching peace. Red Thunder, she said finally, what will happen when we reach your village? How will your people react to seeing you with a white woman? Red Thunder's expression grew serious. There will be anger, fear. Many of my people have lost family members to white soldiers and settlers. They will see you as a potential threat, or at best as a reminder of their pain. Some may demand that I send you away immediately. And will you send me away? Not unless you wish to go. I gave you my protection, and that protection does not end when others disapprove of it. But I will not lie to you, Hannah Patterson. The path ahead will not be easy for either of us. Hannah nodded, having expected as much. I've grown used to difficult paths, and I'd rather face hostility among people who value honor than continue living as property among people who see me as less than human. There is another thing, Red Thunder continued. My position as war chief means that my actions reflect upon the entire band. If the council decides that bringing you to the village was a mistake, they may remove me from leadership. Are you prepared to live with that responsibility? Hannah stared at him in shock. You would risk your position as chief for someone you barely know? Leadership that can be lost so easily was never truly held. A man who leads only when it is convenient is not a leader at all, but a follower who happens to stand in front. The simple wisdom of his words hit Hannah like a physical blow. Here was a man who understood honor in a way that most people never would. Not as a word to be spoken when convenient, but as a principle to be lived, even when it cost everything. I don't understand you, she said quietly. Everything I was taught about Apache people said you were savage, violent, without conscience or honor. But you're the most honorable man I've ever met. And what were you taught about white women? Red Thunder asked with a slight smile. That they were weak, helpless creatures who fainted at the first sign of trouble. Yet you stood armed against 3 buffalo hunters to claim your freedom. Perhaps what we are taught about each other says more about the teachers than the students. Hannah laughed despite herself, the first genuine laughter she had experienced in months. You have a point. Though I should mention that I was terrified the entire time. I just didn't want to give Morrison the satisfaction of seeing me back down. Courage is not the absence of fear, Red Thunder observed. It is acting righteously despite the fear. You showed true courage today, Hannah Patterson. Many warriors would be proud to claim such bravery. As the night deepened around them, Red Thunder showed Hannah how to arrange her blankets for maximum warmth in the desert cold. The temperature dropped quickly after sunset, and without the fire's warmth, the canyon would become uncomfortably chilly. But the sheltered space and the natural windbreak provided by the rock walls would keep them safe from the worst of the cold. Rest now, Red Thunder said, settling down on the opposite side of the fire. Tomorrow we enter the heart of Apache country, and the journey will become more dangerous. We must be alert and ready for whatever we encounter. Hannah arranged her meager blankets and tried to get comfortable on the hard ground. After months of sleeping on a thin pallet in the trading post's storage room, the desert floor wasn't much of a change. But something was different tonight. Despite being in the middle of hostile territory with a man she had known for less than a day, she felt safer than she had in months. Red Thunder, she called softly across the dying fire. Yes, thank you. Not just for buying my freedom, but for treating me like a person worthy of respect. I had almost forgotten what that felt like. Sleep well, Hannah Patterson. Tomorrow begins a new chapter of your story, but sleep was elusive for both of them. Hannah lay staring up at the stars, visible through the canyon opening, marveling at how bright they seemed, away from the smoky lamps of the trading post. The vastness of the sky made her feel small, but not insignificant, more like a single note in a grand symphony, important not for its individual volume, but for its contribution to the greater whole. Red Thunder dozed fitfully, his warrior's instincts keeping him partially alert, even in sleep. Every sound brought him closer to full wakefulness. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the distant sound of horses moving through the night. That last sound brought him fully awake, hand instinctively moving to his knife. "Hannah," he whispered urgently. "Wake up! We have company." Hannah came awake instantly, months of nervous sleep having trained her to respond quickly to any disturbance. "What is it?" "Riders. Coming this way. At least 4 horses, moving carefully but steadily toward our position." Red thunder quickly scattered the remains of their fire, plunging the canyon into darkness. The starlight was bright enough to see by, but wouldn't reveal their exact position to anyone approaching from outside. He moved to where the horses were picketed, calming them with gentle touches and whispered words in Apache. "Could it be your people?" Hannah asked, gathering her few belongings with practiced efficiency. "Possible, but unlikely. My warriors would announce themselves before approaching a sacred place. These riders move like white men, unfamiliar with the proper protocols." The sound of approaching horses grew louder, and soon they could hear voices carrying on the still night air. English voices, rough and angry, discussing the best way to search the canyon. Red Thunder's jaw tightened as he recognized one of the speakers. "Morrison," he said grimly. "The buffalo hunter from the trading post. He has brought friends." Hannah felt her heart start to race. "How many?" From the sound, perhaps 6 or 7 men, well armed and angry. They followed our trail despite the rocky ground. Red Thunder quickly saddled both horses while Hannah gathered their gear. The canyon had only one entrance, but there was an old Apache trail that led up the back wall to a narrow ledge. It would be dangerous to navigate in the dark, but it was their only chance of escape without a direct confrontation. "Can you climb?" Red Thunder asked, pointing to the ancient handholds carved into the rock face by generations of Apache hands. "I'll have to," Hannah replied, looking up at the intimidating cliff face. "What about the horses?" "We leave them. Better to lose horses than lives. The spirits of this place will protect them until we can return." The voices outside the canyon were getting closer, and now they could hear the distinctive sound of weapons being checked and loaded. Morrison and his companions were preparing for violence, clearly intending to take Hannah by force and deal with Red Thunder permanently. "Up there behind those rocks," Red Thunder whispered, helping Hannah find her first handhold. "Climb slowly and quietly. Do not look down, and do not worry about anything except the next hold above you." Hannah began her ascent, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard throughout the canyon. The handholds were worn smooth by centuries of use, but they were still solid and well-positioned. Whoever had carved this escape route had known their business. Behind her, she could hear Red Thunder beginning his own climb, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had used such routes many times before. The first of Morrison's men appeared at the canyon entrance just as Hannah reached a small ledge halfway up the cliff face. From their elevated position, she and Red Thunder could see the entire scene below as the buffalo hunters spread out to search the canyon. Their abandoned fire was cold, but the ashes were still warm to the touch. "They were here recent," one of the men called out. "Fire's still got some heat to it. Where the hell did they go?" Morrison snarled, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Ain't but one way in or out of this place. Maybe they heard us coming and hid deeper in the canyon," another voice suggested. Red Thunder and Hannah pressed themselves against the rock face as the searchers moved below them, their lanterns casting dancing shadows on the ancient petroglyphs. The irony was not lost on either of them. They were hiding in the same place where Red Thunder's ancestors had once hidden from their enemies, protected by the same stone spirits that had watched over generations of Apache people. "Look at all this savage artwork," one of Morrison's men said, shining his light on the petroglyphs. "Bunch of heathen nonsense if you ask me." "Don't matter what it is," Morrison replied. "What matters is finding that redskin and the woman." They got to be here somewhere. The search continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Red Thunder and Hannah remained motionless on their ledge, barely breathing, as the buffalo hunters examined every shadow and crevice below. Finally, frustrated by their inability to find any trace of their quarry, Morrison called his men together. "They ain't here," he admitted reluctantly. "Must have heard us coming and slipped out some way we didn't see. Probably no secret trails we don't, so what do we do now?" One of his companions asked, "We keep hunting. That Apache bastard can't protect her forever, and when he slips up, we'll be ready. No white woman's gonna live among savages while I draw breath." The buffalo hunters mounted their horses and rode out of the canyon, their voices fading into the distance. But Red Thunder and Hannah remained on their ledge for another hour, making sure the men were truly gone before beginning their descent. The climb down was even more treacherous than the ascent, but eventually they both stood safely on the canyon floor. "That was too close," Hannah said, her voice shaking slightly from adrenaline and exhaustion. "They will not give up easily," Red Thunder warned. "Morrison is a man driven by hatred and pride. He will continue to hunt us until he succeeds or dies in the attempt." Hannah looked around the canyon that had briefly been their sanctuary, now violated by the presence of men who saw only empty space where others saw sacred ground. "We can't stay here. They might come back with more men. No, we cannot stay. But first, we must perform a cleansing ceremony for this place." The buffalo hunters brought bad spirits with their hatred and violence. "The ancestors require that we remove this stain before we leave." Red Thunder gathered sage from the plants growing near the spring and lit it with a coal from their scattered fire. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, carrying his whispered prayers to the spirits of the canyon. Hannah watched in respectful silence, understanding that she was witnessing something ancient and important. When the ceremony was complete, they quickly gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. The horses had remained calm throughout the ordeal, as if they too understood the sacred nature of their hiding place. As they led the animals toward the canyon entrance, Hannah took one last look at the petroglyphs on the walls. "I'll never forget this place," she said softly. "It saved our lives tonight. The spirits of my ancestors protected us," Red Thunder agreed. "But the real test lies ahead. Morrison and his men know we are in this area now. They will bring more hunters, more guns. The journey to my village has become much more dangerous." As they rode out into the desert night, Hannah felt the weight of their situation settling upon her shoulders. She had chosen freedom over safety, uncertainty over bondage. But freedom, she was learning, came with a price that had to be paid in constant vigilance and unending courage. Behind them, the sacred canyon returned to its ancient silence, keeping the secrets of all who had sheltered within its walls. But ahead lay challenges that would test everything both Red Thunder and Hannah believed about honor, loyalty, and the true meaning of courage. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time in months, Hannah faced the unknown without fear, because she was no longer facing it alone. Dawn broke like a crimson wound across the eastern mountains, as Red Thunder and Hannah approached the hidden valley that sheltered the mountain wolf band's winter camp. The journey from the sacred canyon had taken them through treacherous terrain that only an Apache could navigate. Narrow mountain passes where loose rocks could trigger deadly avalanches, ancient trails that seemed to disappear into sheer cliff faces, and valleys so remote that even the cavalry's best scouts had never found them. Hannah's respect for Red Thunder's knowledge of the land had grown with each mile. He moved through the wilderness like a man reading a familiar book, interpreting signs that were invisible to her untrained eyes. The way he could determine direction from the growth patterns of trees, find water by watching the flight of birds, and predict weather changes from the behavior of small animals seemed almost magical to someone raised in the civilized confines of Missouri farmland. But now, as they reached the final ridge overlooking his people's camp, Red Thunder's confident demeanor shifted to something more cautious, more uncertain. Below them spread a collection of traditional Apache dwellings, wickiups constructed from bent saplings and covered with hides and brush, arranged in family clusters around larger communal structures. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children played between the dwellings, and women worked at various tasks while keeping watchful eyes on their surroundings. "My people," Red Thunder said simply, but Hannah could hear the complex mixture of love and apprehension in his voice. "The Mountain Wolf Band. My responsibility for nearly 10 years now." Hannah studied the peaceful scene below, trying to reconcile it with the savage imagery that had filled her nightmares since Tom's death. These looked like families, not the bloodthirsty warriors she had been taught to fear. Children laughed as they chased each other around the camp. Women worked together on various tasks, their conversations creating a gentle hum of domestic activity. It looked, she realized with surprise, remarkably similar to any frontier settlement. "How many people?" she asked. 43 souls. 15 warriors, 18 women, 10 children. Not a large band, but we have survived where larger groups have been scattered or destroyed. Red Thunder's horse shifted restlessly beneath him, sensing its rider's tension. Below in the camp, someone had spotted them on the ridge. A shout went up, and people began emerging from their dwellings to stare at the two figures silhouetted against the morning sky. Even from this distance, Hannah could sense the excitement and confusion her presence was causing. "They know something is wrong," Red Thunder observed. "I left with my war horse and returned with a strange mount and a white woman. They will want explanations immediately, and what will you tell them?" "The truth. It is the only thing that has ever served me well in leadership." They began their descent toward the camp, and Hannah felt her stomach tighten with each step. She had faced angry buffalo hunters with more confidence than she felt approaching this group of Apache families. At least with Morrison and his men, she had known what to expect: violence, hatred, and brutality. But these people were an unknown quantity, and their judgment would determine whether her newfound freedom meant anything at all. The first person to reach them was a young warrior named Swift Arrow, barely out of his teens, but already bearing the scars and confidence of an experienced fighter. His eyes went immediately to Hannah, and she saw surprise, suspicion, and barely controlled anger flash across his features. "Red Thunder," Swift Arrow said in English. "Clearly for Hannah's benefit, what is the meaning of this? Why do you bring a white woman to our sacred places?" "I will explain everything to the council," Red Thunder replied calmly. "But first, this woman needs food and rest. She has traveled far and suffered much." Swift Arrow's hand moved instinctively to his knife. "She brings danger to our people. The soldiers will follow her here, and then we will all suffer for your foolishness." "Enough!" Red Thunder's voice carried the authority of command, and Swift Arrow immediately stepped back. But Hannah could see that the young warrior's concerns were shared by the growing crowd of onlookers gathering around them. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a blade. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd, her weathered face stern but her eyes curious. This was Standing Bear Woman, the band's senior elder, and the person whose opinion carried almost as much weight as Red Thunder's in tribal decisions. Her grey hair was braided with silver ornaments that caught the morning light, and her clothing marked her as someone of high status within the community. "Grandson," she said to Red Thunder, using the formal term of respect rather than his name, "you have brought great surprise to your people. We see that Lightning Strike is not with you, and in his place you bring a white woman who looks as though she has not eaten properly in many days. Explain this mystery." Red Thunder dismounted and helped Hannah down from her horse, noting how she swayed slightly from exhaustion and stress. The crowd pressed closer, and Hannah found herself the center of attention in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. Dozens of pairs of eyes studied her with mixtures of curiosity, suspicion, and outright hostility. "Grandmother," Red Thunder said, using the formal address for Standing Bear Woman, "I have traded Lightning Strike for this woman's freedom. She was held in bondage by the white trader Cutlass, forced to work without payment to satisfy debts she did not create. I have brought her here to live among us as a free person under my protection." The crowd erupted in angry voices. Some spoke in Apache, too rapid for Hannah to follow, but their tone made their feelings clear. Others switched to English, perhaps wanting her to understand their objections. "This is madness," shouted an older warrior named Black Elk. "You traded our finest war horse for a white woman? What spell has she cast over you?" "The soldiers will come," added a woman named Singing Crow. "They always come when white women disappear. Our children will pay the price for this foolishness." Standing Bear Woman raised her hand for silence, and the crowd gradually quieted. Her ancient eyes studied Hannah with an intensity that seemed to penetrate right through to her soul. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years and wisdom. "You," she said to Hannah in clear English. "White woman, do you understand what you have brought upon this camp by your presence here?" Hannah straightened her shoulders and met the elder's gaze directly. "I understand that my presence creates danger for your people. I understand that many here see me as an enemy. But I also understand that Chief Red Thunder offered me freedom when no one else would, and I will not dishonor his gift by cowering in fear." Standing Bear Woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been approval. "You speak with courage. But courage alone does not make you welcome here. Tell me, White Woman, what do you know of our ways? What do you know of the suffering your people have brought to ours?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Hannah felt the weight of every gaze upon her as she formulated her response. She could give the easy answer, claim ignorance of the conflicts between their peoples. Or she could tell the truth, even if it made her situation more difficult. "I know that Apache warriors killed my husband 8 months ago," Hannah said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd. "I know that white soldiers have killed Apache families in revenge for raids and attacks. I know that both our peoples have suffered losses that can never be repaid. But I also know that hatred only breeds more hatred, and someone has to choose a different path." The crowd fell silent at her words. Several warriors looked shocked that she had admitted to being a victim of Apache violence. Others seemed surprised by her willingness to acknowledge the broader cycle of revenge that had consumed both peoples. Standing Bear Woman studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "And what path do you choose, White Woman? What do you offer this band besides danger and the promise of army retaliation?" Hannah thought of all the skills she had learned during her marriage to Tom and her months of servitude at the trading post. But she sensed that practical abilities weren't what Standing Bear Woman was really asking about. "I offer my word that I will not betray your people's trust. I offer my willingness to learn your ways and earn my place here through service, not privilege. And I offer the hope that maybe, if we can learn to see each other as people instead of enemies, others might follow our example." Standing Bear Woman exchanged glances with several other elders who had moved closer to hear the conversation. Some kind of silent communication passed between them, and Hannah had the distinct feeling that she was being evaluated on criteria she couldn't even guess at. "The council will meet," Standing Bear Woman announced. "Until we decide what to do with this situation, the White Woman will be held under guard. She will be fed and sheltered, but she will not be free to move about the camp unescorted." Red Thunder started to object, but Standing Bear Woman cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You have created this situation with your impulsive actions, grandson. Now you must trust the wisdom of the council to resolve it. Take the woman to the guest lodge and see that she is cared for. But remember that guards will be posted." As the crowd began to disperse, Hannah found herself being led toward a small wickiup on the edge of the camp. Red Thunder walked beside her, his face grim with the knowledge that his decision to bring her here had created exactly the kind of crisis he had hoped to avoid. "I'm sorry," Hannah said quietly as they approached the lodge. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your people." "You have brought truth," Red Thunder replied. "Sometimes truth is more troubling than lies. But it is always more valuable." The guest lodge was simple but comfortable, with sleeping furs arranged around a small fire pit and basic necessities for cooking and washing. 2 young warriors took up positions outside the entrance, making it clear that Hannah was indeed under guard, despite the hospitable accommodations. "The council will meet at sunset," Red Thunder told her. "I will speak on your behalf, but the final decision will be theirs to make. Until then, rest and eat. You will need your strength for whatever comes next." After Red Thunder left, Hannah found herself alone for the first time since leaving the trading post. The silence felt strange after so many hours of travel and conversation, but it gave her time to think about the magnitude of what was happening. She was sitting in an Apache camp, surrounded by people who had every reason to hate her, waiting for a tribal council to decide her fate. A soft scratching at the lodge entrance interrupted her thoughts. A young Apache woman entered, carrying a wooden bowl of stew and a cup of herbal tea. She was perhaps 18 years old, with intelligent dark eyes and an elaborate hairstyle that marked her as unmarried. Her clothing was beautifully decorated with beadwork and silver ornaments. "I am Morning Star," the young woman said in careful English. "Standing Bear Woman sent me to bring you food and to answer any questions you might have about our customs." Hannah accepted the food gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since the meager meal she had shared with Red Thunder at the canyon. The stew was delicious, made with meat she couldn't identify and seasoned with herbs that were completely unfamiliar, but somehow perfect together. "Thank you," Hannah said between spoonfuls. "This is wonderful. And thank you for speaking English with me. I'm afraid I don't know any Apache words." Morning Star settled herself across the fire pit, her posture relaxed but alert. "Red Thunder taught many of us your language. He said it was important to understand our enemies if we hope to survive in this changing world. And do you see me as an enemy?" Morning Star considered the question seriously. "I see you as a mystery. Red Thunder is known for his wisdom in all things, but this action puzzles everyone. To trade Lightning Strike, his most prized possession, for a white woman he barely knew. It makes no sense by any logic our people understand." Hannah set down her bowl and studied the young woman's face. "What do you think the council will decide?" "That depends on many things. Whether they believe your presence here brings more danger than benefit. Whether they trust Red Thunder's judgment despite their confusion about his motives. Whether you can prove yourself worthy of the risk our people are taking. And how do I prove myself worthy?" Morning Star smiled, the first genuinely friendly expression Hannah had seen since arriving at the camp. "That, white woman, is what you must figure out for yourself. But I will tell you this, Standing Bear Woman is the wisest person in our band. If she sees something in you worth preserving, others will listen to her counsel." They talked for another hour as the sun moved across the sky toward its appointment with the western mountains. Morning Star told Hannah about the band's history, their struggles to remain free in an increasingly hostile world, and the delicate balance they maintained between tradition and adaptation. In return, Hannah shared stories of her life before coming west, her marriage to Tom, and her months of servitude at the trading post. "You have known suffering," Morning Star observed when Hannah finished her story. "Our people understand suffering. Perhaps that will count in your favor when the council meets." As afternoon shadows lengthened, the sounds of the camp began to change. The normal activities of daily life gave way to preparations for the evening council meeting. Hannah could hear drums being tuned and the low voices of men discussing serious matters. Her guards changed shifts, with 2 older warriors replacing the younger ones who had been watching her lodge. "The council drums," Morning Star explained when she noticed Hannah listening intently to the rhythmic sounds. "They call all adult members of the band to gather and hear testimony about important decisions. Tonight, you are the important decision." Standing Bear Woman arrived at the lodge just as the sun touched the western peaks. She had changed into her most formal clothing, a dress decorated with hundreds of small silver bells that chimed softly with her every movement, and a magnificent headdress made from eagle feathers and turquoise stones. "It is time," the elder said simply. "Come, white woman, your fate awaits." Hannah rose and followed Standing Bear Woman toward the center of the camp, where a large fire had been built, and the entire band was gathering in a circle around it. The flames cast dancing shadows on faces both curious and hostile, creating an atmosphere that felt both ceremonial and threatening. Red Thunder sat with the other senior warriors, his expression carefully neutral as he watched Hannah take her place in the center of the circle. "People of the Mountain Wolf Band," Standing Bear Woman began, her voice carrying clearly in the still evening air, "we gather tonight to decide the fate of this white woman whom our war chief has brought among us. She claims to seek freedom and peace, but her presence brings danger to our children and our way of life. We must choose between compassion and caution, between the old ways of hatred and the possibility of something new. The formal beginning of the council meeting sent a chill through Hannah as she realized that the next few hours would determine not just her immediate future, but possibly the rest of her life. Around the circle, faces reflected the firelight like masks of judgment, and she understood that she was about to face the most important test of her life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. In the distance, a wolf howled, a sound that seemed to echo the wild uncertainty of her situation and the untamed possibilities that lay ahead. The council fire burned with sacred flames that had been kindled using traditional methods passed down through generations of Apache elders. Anna stood in the center of the circle, feeling the weight of 43 pairs of eyes, studying her every breath, every gesture, every flicker of expression that might reveal her true nature. The drums had fallen silent, leaving only the crackle of burning wood and the distant sounds of night creatures beginning their evening songs. Standing Bear Woman raised her carved talking stick, its surface decorated with symbols that told the history of the Mountain Wolf Band. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had guided her people through decades of war, displacement and survival against impossible odds. We begin with the testimony of Red Thunder, who brought this woman among us. Speak, Warchief. Tell your people why you have risked everything we have built for the sake of a stranger. Red Thunder rose from his place among the senior warriors, his movements deliberate and measured. Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained over his emotions as he prepared to defend his actions before the people he had sworn to protect. My people, Red Thunder began, his voice strong but humble. 8 suns ago, I received a vision from the spirits of our ancestors. They showed me a crossroads where our band must choose between the path of endless war and a different way forward. In this vision, I saw a woman in chains whose freedom would teach us something we needed to learn about the difference between strength and wisdom. A murmur rippled through the gathered circle. Visions were taken seriously among the Apache, but they were also subject to interpretation and debate. Black Elk, the older warrior who had objected earlier, shook his head in obvious disagreement. Visions can be false, Black Elk said, when Standing Bear Woman nodded for him to speak. They can be sent by evil spirits to lead us astray. What proof do we have that this vision came from our ancestors and not from demons who want to see our band destroyed? Red Thunder's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. The proof is in the woman herself. Look at her, Black Elk. She has survived months of bondage without breaking. She faced armed men to claim her freedom. She chose to come with me knowing she would face hostility and danger among our people. Does this sound like the work of evil spirits? It sounds like the work of a spy, Swift Arrow interjected, his young voice sharp with suspicion. The army uses women as spies. They send them to learn our secrets, count our warriors, discover our weaknesses. How do we know she is not such a person? Hannah felt her heart racing as the accusations flew around her. The logical part of her mind understood their suspicions. In their position, she would be equally cautious about accepting a stranger into the group. But emotionally, hearing herself described as a potential spy and demon-sent deceiver was deeply painful. Standing Bear Woman raised her hand for silence. The woman will speak for herself. Tell us, White Woman, what do you say to these accusations? Are you a spy sent by the army to betray our people? Anna straightened her shoulders and looked around the circle, meeting as many eyes as she could. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. I am not a spy. I'm exactly what Chief Red Thunder told you, a widow who was held in bondage for debts I did not create. If the army wanted to send a spy among you, they would choose someone with military training, someone who could fight and kill if necessary. I can barely handle a pistol, and I have no knowledge of military tactics or procedures. Then what use are you to us? Black Elk demanded. Why should we feed another mouth when winter approaches and game grows scarce? What skills do you possess that would benefit our people? Hannah had been dreading this question, knowing that her domestic abilities would seem trivial compared to the survival skills prized by the Apache. But she had promised herself to tell only the truth, regardless of the consequences. I can read and write in English. I can keep records, write letters, help with negotiations when you need to communicate with white authorities. I know how to tend wounds and prepare medicines from common plants. I can cook, clean, mend clothing, and care for children. These may seem like small things to you, but they are the skills I have. An elderly woman named Crooked Nose spoke up from her place near the fire. Reading and writing are valuable skills. There have been times when we needed to understand the white man's papers, but had no one who could interpret them properly. Yes, agreed another elder, and someone who understands both cultures might help us avoid misunderstandings that lead to violence. But Swift Arrow remained unconvinced. She admits her husband was killed by Apache warriors. How do we know she does not seek revenge? How do we know she will not poison our children or lead soldiers to our camp when the opportunity arises? The accusation hit Hannah like a physical blow. She had been prepared for suspicion and hostility, but not for the suggestion that she might harm children. The very idea made her sick to her stomach, because, she said, her voice rising with emotion for the first time, I know what it's like to lose someone you love to violence. I know the pain of grief and the poison of hatred. And I know that causing that same pain to others would make me no better than the people who destroyed my life. Standing Bear Woman studied Hannah's face intently. You speak of hatred as poison. Explain this. Hannah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might determine her fate. For months after my husband's death, I hated all Apache people. I blamed an entire nation for the actions of a few young warriors. That hatred consumed me, made me bitter and angry and small. It wasn't until Chief Red Thunder showed me kindness that I realized how much that hatred was hurting me, not the people I blamed. And now, Standing Bear Woman pressed, what do you feel toward the Apache people now? Now I feel grateful to the one Apache who saw me as a person worth saving. And I feel hope that maybe, if we can learn to see past our fears and prejudices, there might be a way forward that doesn't require constant bloodshed. A long silence fell over the circle as the elders digested her words. Hannah could see some faces softening slightly, while others remained hard and suspicious. The outcome was far from certain. Then a new voice spoke from the shadows beyond the fire. A young woman stepped into the circle, and Hannah recognized Little Fox, one of the band's medicine women. She was perhaps 30 years old, with premature gray streaking her black hair and scars on her hands from years of gathering and preparing healing plants. I would test this woman, Little Fox announced. If she truly possesses healing knowledge as she claims, let her prove it. My daughter has been fevered for 3 days, and my treatments have not helped her. If this white woman can heal Mourning Dove, I will speak for her acceptance into our band. A buzz of conversation erupted around the circle. This was unexpected, a direct challenge that would put Hannah's claimed abilities to an immediate test. Red Thunder looked concerned, knowing that failure could doom Hannah's chances, while success might not guarantee acceptance. I agree to the test, Hannah said, before anyone else could speak. But I must be honest, I am not a trained doctor. I can only offer what knowledge I have and hope it will be sufficient. Standing Bear Woman nodded approvingly. Honesty in the face of challenge. This speaks well of your character. The test will be conducted immediately with witnesses to ensure fairness. Little Fox led Hannah to a nearby wickiup, where her daughter lay on a bed of furs, her small body burning with fever. Mourning Dove was perhaps 8 years old, with the delicate features of childhood made gaunt by illness. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, and her skin felt hot and dry to the touch. Hannah knelt beside the child and gently examined her. using techniques she had learned from watching the doctors at Mercy General during her brief time as a volunteer before her marriage. The symptoms suggested a respiratory infection, possibly complicated by dehydration from the prolonged fever. "How long has she been unable to keep food down?" Hannah asked Little Fox. 2 days. "She takes water but vomits anything solid." Hannah nodded, her mind working through the possibilities. With the gathered crowd watching her every move, she began to mentally inventory the medicinal plants she had seen growing around the camp. Some were familiar from her time in Missouri, while others were completely unknown to her. "I need willow bark for the fever," Hannah said, speaking to the crowd as much as to Little Fox. "Also sage for purification, and if you have it, something similar to what whites call echinacea for fighting infection." Little Fox's eyes widened slightly. "You know of the purple flower medicine? That is Apache knowledge, not white knowledge. Plants don't recognize the color of the hands that gather them," Hannah replied. "Healing knowledge belongs to anyone wise enough to learn it." Working together, Little Fox and Hannah prepared a series of teas and poultices using traditional Apache methods, combined with techniques Hannah had learned from white folk medicine. The crowd watched in fascination as 2 women from different worlds collaborated to help a sick child. The breakthrough came when Hannah noticed something Little Fox had missed: small red spots behind Mourning Dove's ears that suggested a specific type of childhood illness she had seen in Missouri. If she was right, the fever would break within hours if they could keep the child hydrated and comfortable. "This is not a lung sickness," Hannah announced to the watching crowd. "This is the spotted fever that affects children. The fever will break naturally, but we must keep her drinking fluids and watch for complications." Throughout the night, Hannah and Little Fox took turns caring for Mourning Dove, monitoring her temperature and encouraging her to sip small amounts of medicinal tea. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath as they waited to see whether the white woman's diagnosis was correct. Just before dawn, Mourning Dove's fever broke in a rush of perspiration that soaked her furs. She opened her eyes for the first time in days and asked for water in a clear, strong voice. The crowd of watchers erupted in surprised murmurs and exclamations. Little Fox stared at Hannah with something approaching awe. "You were right. The fever has broken, and she breathes easily now." "How did you know?" "I've seen this illness before," Hannah replied, exhaustion making her voice hoarse. "Children in Missouri sometimes get it during certain seasons. The important thing is that Mourning Dove will recover fully with rest and proper care." As news of the successful healing spread through the camp, Hannah found herself surrounded by people who looked at her with new eyes. The hostile suspicion was still there, but it was now mixed with respect and cautious acceptance. Standing Bear Woman approached as Hannah cleaned her hands in a basin of warm water. "You have proven yourself useful to our people," the elder said formally. "Little Fox has requested that you be accepted as a member of our band, and her voice carries great weight in such matters." But before Hannah could respond, shouts erupted from the edge of the camp. Swift Arrow came running toward the council fire, his face grim with urgent news. "Soldiers," he gasped. "A full cavalry patrol approaching from the south. They will be here within the hour." The camp exploded into controlled chaos as families began preparing for the possibility of flight or fight. Children were gathered, weapons were checked, and escape routes were reviewed. In the midst of this activity, all eyes turned to Hannah with renewed suspicion. "Coincidence?" Black Elk asked loudly. "The white woman arrives, and within 2 days, soldiers follow her here." "I had nothing to do with this," Hannah protested, but she could see doubt creeping back into faces that had just begun to show acceptance. Red Thunder stepped forward, his hand on his weapon. "It doesn't matter how they found us. What matters is what we do now. We can fight, but against a full patrol we would likely lose. We can flee, but that means abandoning our winter supplies and facing the cold season without adequate provisions." "There is a third option," Standing Bear Woman said quietly, her ancient eyes fixed on Hannah's face. We can see if our new member has truly chosen which side she stands on. Hannah felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Everything that had happened since Red Thunder traded his horse for her freedom had led to this instant, this choice between the world she had known and the people who had tentatively begun to accept her. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, and in those words committed herself to a path that would change everything. The cavalry patrol that approached the mountain wolf camp consisted of 24 mounted soldiers led by Captain Marcus Thornfield, a career officer whose hatred of Apache people had been forged in the crucible of border wars and personal loss. His younger brother had died in an Apache raid 3 years earlier, and since then Thornfield had made it his personal mission to hunt down every hostile band in the territory. The morning sun glinted off polished sabers and rifle barrels as the soldiers arranged themselves in a tactical formation designed to prevent escape. Hannah stood with the Apache families as they watched the approaching cavalry, her heart pounding with the knowledge that her next actions would determine not just her own fate, but possibly the survival of everyone in the camp. Standing Bear Woman had outlined the desperate plan in hushed tones. Hannah would go out to meet the soldiers as a supposed captive who had escaped, claiming that the Apache band was holding other white prisoners deeper in the mountains. If she could convince the cavalry to follow her away from the camp, the families would have time to scatter to their hidden strongholds. Remember, Red Thunder said quietly as Hannah prepared to leave the camp, you owe these people nothing. If you choose to save yourself by telling the soldiers the truth, no one here would blame you. You have already proven your worth by healing Mourning Dove. Hannah looked into his dark eyes and saw the conflict there, hope that she would choose to protect his people, but understanding if she chose to save herself instead. The weight of that trust, freely given despite the risk, settled something deep in her heart. I made my choice when I accepted your protection, Hannah replied. These are my people now, and I don't abandon family. She walked out to meet the cavalry with her hands raised, playing the role of a frightened captive who had managed to escape her Apache captors. Captain Thornfield rode forward to meet her, his weathered face showing a mixture of relief and suspicion as he studied this unexpected white woman appearing from the wilderness. "Ma'am," Thornfield said, dismounting and approaching her carefully. "I'm Captain Thornfield, United States Cavalry. Are you injured? How many other prisoners are the Apaches holding?" Hannah forced tears into her eyes and let her voice shake with manufactured fear. "Captain, thank God you've come. They've been holding me for weeks. There are 3 other women prisoners in a camp about 10 miles north of here, hidden in a box canyon. The Apache war chief took most of his warriors there yesterday, leaving only a few guards with me." Thornfield's eyes hardened with predatory interest. The idea of rescuing multiple white captives would make excellent copy in his reports to headquarters, potentially earning him the promotion he had been seeking. "How many guards? How well are they armed?" "Maybe 6 or 7 warriors with older rifles. But Captain, we need to hurry. The war chief said he was planning to move the prisoners again tomorrow. If we don't reach them soon, they might disappear deeper into the mountains, where we'll never find them." Hannah led the cavalry patrol away from the hidden camp, her heart aching as she thought about the families frantically packing their few possessions and preparing to flee to emergency shelters scattered throughout the high country. Children would go hungry, elders would suffer in the cold, and all because she had brought danger to their peaceful existence. For 2 hours, she guided the soldiers through increasingly treacherous terrain, leading them deeper into a maze of canyons and dead-end valleys that she prayed would buy the Apache families enough time to reach safety. But as the morning wore on, Captain Thornfield began to show signs of suspicion about their route. "This doesn't look like territory where Apaches would establish a permanent camp," Thornfield observed, as they navigated yet another narrow passage between towering rock walls. "There's no water source, no grazing for horses, no easy escape routes." Hannah's mind raced as she tried to come up with a plausible explanation. "The war chief is very clever, Captain. He deliberately chose a location that seems unsuitable because he knew soldiers would think the same way you do. The water comes from a hidden spring that's not visible until you're right on top of it. But Thornfield was a veteran of too many Apache campaigns to be easily fooled. He called a halt to the column and studied Hannah's face with the calculating gaze of a man who had learned to read deception in the expressions of captured enemies. "You're lying," he said flatly. "There are no other prisoners, are there? You've been leading us in circles to give your Apache friends time to escape." The game was up. Hannah could see it in the captain's eyes, in the way his hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm. Around her, 24 mounted soldiers were beginning to realize they had been deceived by a woman they had assumed was a helpless victim. "Sergeant Morrison," Thornfield called to his second-in-command, "place this woman under arrest for aiding and abetting hostile Indians. We're returning to that Apache camp immediately, and God help anyone who tries to stop us." Hannah's heart sank as she realized her deception had bought the Mountain Wolf Band perhaps 3 hours at most. It might be enough time for the families to reach their emergency shelters, but it would also mean that Red Thunder and the other warriors would be forced to face the cavalry in direct combat. The return journey to the Apache camp was a nightmare of anxiety and dread for Hannah. Bound and tied to her saddle, she could only watch helplessly as Captain Thornfield drove his men hard through the desert terrain, determined to catch the Apache families before they could complete their escape. The captain's face was set in lines of cold fury. He had been made a fool of by a woman, and someone was going to pay dearly for that humiliation. When the cavalry crested the ridge overlooking the valley where the Mountain Wolf camp had been, Hannah's heart leaped with desperate hope. The wickiups were gone, the fire circles cold and scattered. It looked as though the Apache families had successfully evacuated to their hidden refuges in the high country. But Captain Thornfield was not deceived by the apparently empty valley. Years of fighting Apache warriors had taught him to read the subtle signs that revealed recent habitation, the patterns of disturbed earth where structures had been hastily dismantled, the faint trails leading toward the concealed canyon passages, the lingering scent of wood smoke that hung in the still air. "Fan out in groups of 4, Thornfield ordered his men. "Search every canyon, every cave, every hiding place within 5 miles of this location. The Apaches couldn't have gotten far with children and elderly people slowing them down." Hannah watched in growing despair as the soldiers spread out to begin their systematic search of the surrounding terrain. She had bought the Apache family some time, but apparently not enough. If the cavalry found even one of the hidden shelters, the entire band would be forced to surrender or face annihilation. That's when the first shot rang out from the rocky cliffs above the valley. Red Thunder had not fled with the families. Instead, he and his warriors had positioned themselves in carefully chosen sniper positions overlooking the approaches to the hidden shelters. The Apache war chief was making his own desperate gamble, hoping to delay the cavalry long enough for the non-combatants to reach absolute safety. The battle that followed was unlike anything Hannah had ever witnessed or imagined. The Apache warriors fought with the skill and desperation of men defending their families' lives, using every advantage the terrain could provide. They appeared and disappeared among the rocks like ghosts, striking at the cavalry and then melting, away before return fire could find them. But Captain Thornfield's soldiers were experienced Indian fighters, veterans of campaigns against the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Comanche, as well as the Apache. They adapted quickly to the guerrilla tactics, using covering fire and coordinated advances to slowly push the Apache defenders back toward the canyon walls. Hannah found herself in the terrible position of watching 2 groups of people she cared about killing each other in a battle that had started because of her presence among the Apache. Every shot fired, every cry of pain from wounded men on both sides felt like a knife blade twisting in her heart. The turning point came when Swift Arrow, the young warrior who had been most vocal in his opposition to Hannah's presence, made a desperate charge to protect Morning Star and two other women who had been caught in the open while gathering medical supplies from a cache hidden near the old camp. The young Apache threw himself into the path of cavalry fire, giving the women time to reach cover but taking 3 bullets in the process. Hannah watched Swift Arrow fall, his blood staining the desert sand, and something inside her snapped. Without thinking about consequences or personal safety, she began shouting at the top of her lungs, her voice carrying across the battlefield with startling clarity. "Stop! Stop this madness! I'm Hannah Patterson, and I demand that you cease. Fire immediately!" The unexpected intervention of a white woman's voice in the middle of an Apache battle caused a momentary lull in the fighting. Captain Thornfield, recognizing an opportunity to end the engagement without further losses to his own men, signaled for a temporary ceasefire. "Red Thunder!" Hannah called out, knowing the Apache war chief could hear her even if she couldn't. "See him among the rocks. I'm going to try something that might save your people. But I need you to trust me one more time." She turned to face Captain Thornfield, her green eyes blazing with a combination of grief, anger, and desperate determination. "Captain, I want to make a deal with you. These Apache people saved my life, and I won't stand by and watch them be slaughtered for showing me kindness." Thornfield's expression was skeptical but interested. Any solution that didn't require him to assault a well-defended position held obvious appeal, especially since he had already lost 2 men to Apache marksmanship. "What kind of deal?" he asked. "Let the families go. Let them disappear into the mountains where they can live in peace. In return, I'll come with you voluntarily and testify that they treated me well during my captivity. You'll get credit for rescuing a white captive without having to explain why so many of your men died in the process." "And what about the warriors who just killed 2 of my soldiers?" Hannah's voice grew stronger, more confident. "What about the Apache families your armies have killed over the years? How many wrongs does it take to make a right, Captain? Someone has to choose to break the cycle of revenge." Captain Thornfield studied her face, clearly weighing his options. A successful rescue mission with minimal casualties would look much better in his reports than a costly assault that might still result in the Apache families escaping deeper into the wilderness. "The warriors surrender their weapons and submit to military custody," he countered. "No!" Hannah replied firmly. "The warriors get safe passage to rejoin their families. That's not negotiable." The standoff stretched between them like a taut wire, with the fate of the mountain wolf band hanging in the balance. Around them, soldiers and Apache warriors alike waited to see whether words could accomplish what bullets had failed to achieve. Finally, Captain Thornfield nodded slowly. "Very well, Miss Patterson, but if any of these Apaches are found raiding in this territory again, the deal is void, and I'll hunt them down without mercy." Hannah felt a wave of relief wash over her as Red Thunder emerged from the rocks, his rifle held high in a gesture of truce. The Apache war chief's face was grim, but not defeated. He had achieved his primary objective of protecting his people, even if it meant watching Hannah sacrifice her own freedom to accomplish it. "You did not have to do this," Red Thunder said quietly, as Hannah prepared to leave with the cavalry patrol. "Yes, I did," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You taught me what honor really means. Sometimes it requires us to pay prices we never expected to pay." As the cavalry prepared to depart with their voluntary prisoner, Hannah took one last look at the hidden valley that had briefly been her home. She had found something precious here, a sense of belonging, a family that had accepted her despite every reason to reject her, and an understanding of what it truly meant to choose loyalty over safety. The choice had cost her everything she thought she wanted. But as she rode away with the soldiers, Hannah realized she had gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that she was capable of honor, courage, and sacrifice when the people she loved were in danger. Behind her, the mountain wolf, band melted away into the vast wilderness of the high country, carrying with them the memory of a white woman who had proven that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from holding on to power, but from knowing when to let it go. 6 months after Hannah Patterson sacrificed her freedom to save the Mountain Wolf Band, the territorial prison at Fort Stanton had become her world. The adobe walls that surrounded the women's section were thick enough to muffle the desert winds, but thin enough to let through the scorching heat of summer and the bitter cold of winter nights. Hannah shared a cramped cell with 3 other women: a Mexican seamstress convicted of theft, a former saloon girl imprisoned for killing an abusive customer, and an elderly Navajo woman who spoke no English, but whose gentle presence had become a source of comfort. The official charges against Hannah were aiding and abetting hostile Indians, providing material support to enemies of the United States, and conspiracy to obstruct military operations. Captain Thornfield had kept his word about crediting her cooperation, but the territorial judge had been less sympathetic to her circumstances. 3 years hard labor, he had pronounced, was a lenient sentence for someone who had chosen savages over civilization. But Hannah had discovered something remarkable during her months of imprisonment. She felt more at peace than she had since Tom's death. The physical hardships of prison life were nothing compared to the spiritual bondage she had endured at the trading post. Here, scrubbing floors and mending prison uniforms, she was paying a price she had chosen to pay for people she had chosen to love. There was honor in that choice, even if the outside world couldn't understand it. Her days fell into a predictable routine. Dawn brought the harsh clang of the prison bell, followed by a breakfast of thin gruel and stale bread. Morning work. Assignments involved laundry, cooking, or maintaining the prison facilities under the watchful eyes of guards who ranged from professionally indifferent to actively hostile. Afternoons were spent in the prison workshop, where the women made clothing and equipment for the territorial government at wages that barely covered the cost of their incarceration. It was during one of these afternoon work sessions that Hannah first heard rumors of trouble brewing in the high country. Guards talked freely around the prisoners, assuming that convicted criminals had no interest in territorial politics or military affairs. But Hannah listened carefully to every scrap of information about Apache activities, hoping for some word. About the fate of the Mountain Wolf Band. Heard there's been more raids up near Silver Creek, one guard mentioned to another as they supervised the women's sewing circle. Apache warriors hitting supply trains and isolated ranches. Colonel says it might be that band that disappeared after the Thornfield incident. Hannah's needle paused in its stitching as she strained to hear more details. The Thornfield incident, that's what they called the battle, where she had negotiated the Apache family's freedom. If Red Thunder's people were raiding again, it meant they had either grown desperate for supplies or were being pressured by other bands to join a larger conflict. Thought Thornfield cleaned out that area pretty thoroughly, the second guard replied. Drove all the hostiles up into the Badlands, where winter would finish what bullets couldn't. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But someone's been hitting the supply routes pretty regular-like. Smart attacks too, not the wild charging you usually see from young bucks looking to prove themselves. This has the mark of experienced war chiefs planning every move. That evening, as Hannah lay on her thin mattress, listening to the snores and quiet sobs of her cellmates, she found herself torn between pride and worry. Pride that Red Thunder had kept his people alive and free despite the harsh conditions of their mountain exile. Worry that renewed raiding would bring down the full wrath of the territorial government on every Apache band in the region. Her contemplation was interrupted by a soft whisper from the Navajo woman, whose name was Maria Begay. Despite the language barrier, the two women had developed a system of communication through gestures, expressions, and the few Spanish words they shared. Hannah, Maria whispered in her accented English, using one of the few English phrases she had learned. Guard come. You careful. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor confirmed Maria's warning. Hannah quickly closed her eyes and regulated her breathing to simulate sleep, but the footsteps stopped directly outside their cell. Keys rattled in the lock, and the door swung open with its familiar creak. "Patterson!" called Sergeant Willis, the night guard whose reputation for cruelty was matched only by his fondness for whiskey. "Warden wants to see you, now!" Hannah rose quietly, careful not to wake her other cellmates, and followed Willis through the dimly lit corridors of the prison. The warden's office was located in the administrative section, a world away from the harsh simplicity of the cells. Oil paintings of territorial officials decorated the walls, and a Persian rug covered the wooden floor. Behind an imposing oak desk sat Warden Charles Morrison, no relation to the buffalo hunter from the trading post, but possessed of the same casual cruelty toward anyone he considered beneath his notice. "Sit down, Patterson," Morrison said without looking up from the papers scattered across his desk. "We need to discuss your future accommodations." Hannah settled into the hard wooden chair facing the desk, her mind racing through possibilities. It was unusual for prisoners to be summoned to the warden's office after normal business hours, and the formal tone of Morrison's voice suggested this was not a routine administrative matter. "I've received some interesting correspondence regarding your case," Morrison continued, finally looking up to study Hannah's face. "It seems your Apache friends have been busy in the month since your incarceration. Very busy indeed." He held up a letter bearing the official seal of the territorial governor. "Colonel Hayes reports that Apache raids in the Silver Creek region have increased dramatically in both frequency and sophistication. Supply trains that should be easy targets for random attacks are being hit with military precision. Isolated ranches are being struck in coordinated assaults that suggest extensive reconnaissance and planning." Hannah kept her expression carefully neutral, though her heart was racing. "I'm sorry to hear that people are being hurt, Warden, but I don't understand what this has to do with me." Morrison's smile was cold and calculating. "Don't you? The timing is quite remarkable. Within weeks of your imprisonment, a band of Apaches that had been living peacefully in the high country suddenly transforms into a highly effective raiding force. One might almost think they were motivated by a desire to secure the release of someone important to them." The implication hit Hannah like a physical blow. If Red Thunder was raiding to gather resources for a rescue attempt, he was putting his entire band at risk for her sake. The thought of Apache families suffering because of misguided loyalty to her was almost unbearable, even if that were true. Hannah said carefully, "I have no way to communicate with any Apache bands. I've been locked in a cell for 6 months. "Oh, I don't think you're orchestrating anything from in here," Morrison replied. "But I do think you've become a symbol to them. A white woman who chose their cause over her own people. That makes you valuable, Patterson. Valuable enough to trade." Hannah's blood turned to ice. Trade for what? "Information. Safe passage. The location of their hidden camps. You see, Patterson, the territorial government is tired of chasing ghosts through the mountains. We want this Apache problem solved permanently, and you're going to help us do it." The warden leaned back in his chair, obviously pleased with his cleverness. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to arrange for you to escape from this prison. Not really, of course, but it will appear that way to any Apache spies watching our movements. You'll be recaptured after a few days, apparently injured and claiming to have information about your Apache friend's location in exchange for medical treatment." Hannah felt sick to her stomach as the full scope of Morrison's plan became clear. "You want me to betray them? To lead soldiers to their families? I want you to end this conflict before more good Christian folks get killed by savages. Consider it your patriotic duty, and if I refuse..." Morrison's smile became genuinely malevolent. "Then you'll spend the rest of your sentence in solitary confinement. No contact with other prisoners, no work assignments, no privileges of any kind. Just you and 4 stone walls until your mind snaps or your body gives out. Whichever comes first." Hannah stared at the warden in horror, understanding that she was trapped between 2 impossible choices. Betraying Red Thunder's people would destroy everything she had sacrificed her freedom to protect. But enduring years of solitary confinement might drive her insane long before her sentence was complete. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning," Morrison replied, returning his attention to his paperwork. "Make the right choice, Patterson, for everyone's sake." As Sergeant Willis escorted her back to her cell, Hannah's mind churned with desperate possibilities. There had to be another way, some option that didn't require her to choose between her sanity and her honor. But as the cell door clanged shut behind her, trapping her once again in the familiar confines of adobe walls and iron bars, she couldn't see any path forward that didn't lead to betrayal or madness. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the prison. Hannah was summoned from her breakfast duties to the visiting room, where she found herself face to face with a man she had never expected to see again, Jeremiah Cutlass, the trading post owner who had once held her in bondage. But the man sitting across from her bore little resemblance to the confident exploiter she remembered. His clothes were shabby, his face gaunt, and his hands shook with what might have been illness or fear. "Hello, Hannah," Cutlass said, his voice hoarse and uncertain. "I suppose you're surprised to see me here." "That's an understatement," Hannah replied coldly. "What do you want, Cutlass?" "Come to gloat about my imprisonment." Cutlass shook his head, looking genuinely remorseful. "I came to apologize, and to tell you something that might help your situation." Hannah studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way he kept glancing nervously toward the door. "You look terrible. What happened to you?" "The trading post burned down 3 months ago. Apache raid, they said, though no one was killed and nothing else in the area was touched. Funny thing was, they only burned the parts of the building where I kept my records and conducted my business. Left the living quarters completely alone." Despite her situation, Hannah felt a grim satisfaction at this news. Red Thunder's people had destroyed the place where she had been held in bondage, while carefully avoiding unnecessary destruction. It was exactly the kind of precise, meaningful action she would have expected from the Apache war chief. "After that," Cutlass continued, "folks started asking questions about my business practices, how I acquired my property, how I treated my workers, where I got the money to operate such an expensive establishment. Turns out a lot of people had been wondering about those things for years, but nobody wanted to rock the boat as long as I was useful to them." "And now you're not useful anymore," Hannah observed. "Now I'm a liability. The territorial government wants to distance itself from anyone connected to the slave trade, especially with all the attention this Apache situation is getting from newspapers back east. I've been blacklisted, Hannah. Can't get credit, can't find work, can't even get a room at most hotels. I'm finished." Hannah felt no sympathy for the man who had exploited her desperate circumstances, but she was curious about why he had come to see her. "I still don't understand what you want from me." Cutlass leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to make things right. I've got information that could help you, but I need to know you won't use it to hurt innocent people." "What kind of information?" "About the raids. About who's really behind them and why they're happening." Cutlass glanced around nervously before continuing. "It's not your Apache friends, Hannah. The Mountain Wolf Band hasn't been involved in any of the attacks on supply trains or ranches." Hannah's heart leaped with relief and hope. "Then who? Remember Morrison, the buffalo hunter who tried to stop you from leaving with Red Thunder? After the trading post burned, he put together a gang of men to hunt down the Apache band that destroyed my business. But when they couldn't find the real culprits, they started staging fake Apache raids to justify military action against all the bands in the territory." The revelation hit Hannah like a thunderbolt. If Morrison and his gang were behind the raids, then Red Thunder's people were innocent of the recent violence. But they would still suffer when the military retaliation came, unless someone could expose the truth. "Why are you telling me this?" Hannah asked. "Because I've done enough harm to innocent people," Cutlass replied. "And because you're the only person I know who might be brave enough to do something about it." Hannah stared at the broken man across from her, understanding that he was offering her a chance to save Red Thunder's people without betraying them. But acting on this information would require her to escape from prison, expose Morrison's gang, and somehow convince the territorial authorities that they had been chasing the wrong enemies. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" she asked. Cutlass reached into his coat and pulled out a bundle of papers. "Because I kept records of everything, including Morrison's visits to my trading post and his conversations about hunting down the Apache band that cost him his reputation. It's all here, Hannah. Everything you need to prove their innocence and expose the real criminals." Hannah took the papers with trembling hands, realizing that she now held the power to save Red Thunder's people and vindicate her own sacrifice. But using this information would require courage, cunning, and a willingness to risk everything she had left. As Cutlass prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I know I can't undo the harm I've done, Hannah, but maybe this can be a start toward making things right." After he was gone, Hannah sat alone in the visiting room, staring at the papers that could change everything. Tomorrow, Warden Morrison would demand her decision about betraying Red Thunder's people. Tonight, she had to figure out how to turn the tables on everyone who thought they could use her loyalty as a weapon against the people she had chosen to love. The game was far from over. In fact, Hannah realized with growing determination it was just beginning, and this time she intended to win. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.